In this video, I want to talk about Blazor, which will allow us to build web applications using C#. So inside of .NET, the whole open source developer framework, there are a number of different options for building different types of applications. If you want to build web applications, Blazor is one of those options. If you want to build mobile applications, Xamarin is one of those options. If you want to build desktop applications, you've got Windows Presentation Foundation, WinForms, Universal Windows Platform, Xamarin, etc. And Unity under game development. So you've got a lot of different options for building different types of applications. We're going to be focused on web applications, so applications that run inside of the browser. And one little caveat at the time of recording this, we're kind of at a weird moment in .NET where .NET 5 is supposed to come out, which is going to have this new framework that is called MAUI, which is supposed to encompass kind of all of these in one, which will be great when it's there. But in this course at this time, we're focused on Blazor. So Blazor allows us to write what are called components that look like this, where we are going to have some markup, which this is a flavor of HTML here that declares what should show up on the page, and then we can associate some code, so we can write a little class down here with fields and properties and methods that are hooked up to this markup, to this page. So let me open up the sample application that you get when you create a new Blazor application here. I'm not super concerned about diving through all of the files and explaining them, but what I have pulled up is that counter from their documentation page. So here's our markup, and here's our code that is attached to that markup. This code is in C#. This is in a flavor of HTML. And when I run this project, instead of getting a console app like we've gotten when we built console applications, we are now getting a browser window that pops up. It is loaded over our local host. So this isn't connected to the internet, but it is running on our local machine. And then if I go to that counter page and look at it here side by side with the code, this markup is what generates this content on the page. And then as I'm clicking on this button, the C# is running and is hooked up to this markup so that our page updates dynamically. And the way this works is that we've got this P element, this paragraph tag. It says current count : and then using an @ symbol, we are able to insert a field from our class down here that's inside of the @code block, which means that anytime this field changes, our web page will re-render and display the latest version of that value. So every time I click and this count is incremented, our page is re-rendered. And the way that we get the count to increment is that we have this button element here that has this syntax. Again, another @ symbol. On click equals, and then in parentheses, increment count. Or sorry, not in parentheses, in quotation marks, which says that anytime this button is clicked, go ahead and run this method down here, increment count, which takes our count and goes up by 1. So with a little bit of HTML knowledge, we can then hook up our classes. Instead of outputting to our console window, we can hook them up so that they output to the browser window, which for those of you who have been waiting in this class to get to building GUIs, hooray, we're there. We're going to be able to do some cool stuff that is a graphical user interface, a GUI. So to get started, what you need to do in Visual Studio, open up Visual Studio. You can open up an existing project or open it up without a project, and then go into Tools, Get Tools and Features. This will open up the Visual Studio installer, and you need to go into this installer. Mine needs to update, so I'm going to pause the video recording for a second while that updates. And we're back. That updated and opened up. So when you want to use Blazor, you have to open up the tools and features and make sure that ASP.NET and web development is checked here. So if you didn't check it when you were installing Visual Studio, this is what it'll look like. You check it, and then down at the bottom, you'll hit the modify button to commit those, and it'll download a whole bunch of gigabytes of stuff to your machine to get you set up for developing web applications. And within that is the stuff that you need to build Blazor projects. Once you have that installed, when you go to create a new project in Visual Studio, you should be able to search for Blazor here and find it in your options for templates. So you don't want to choose a .NET Core or .NET Framework console app. You want to choose a Blazor application. And since I've done that a number of times recently, it's over here in my recent projects, so I can click it there. I will name it Blazor Intro here. And when you create a new Blazor application, there are two options. There is a Webassembly app, which is an application that runs entirely inside of someone's browser. And there is a server-side version, which is a Blazor application that runs on a server somewhere connected to the internet that someone can connect to and interact with in real time. For this class, we're focusing on that application that lives entirely inside of a browser. So we're building this Blazor WebAssembly application. And in terms of the options, you don't need to change anything here. No authentication. Leave this checked. Don't check this. Leave these unchecked. And we can go ahead and hit create. And this will give us a basic Blazor application. So once you have this loaded, you should be able to, up at the top here, click play and see IIS Express or something slightly different on a Mac. And when I hit play, this runs the default application, builds it, opens up a little Chrome window. On my machine, it may use a different browser if you don't have Chrome installed. Opens up that application and is running it. And we've got a home page, we've got a counter, and we've got this page that shows us some data in a table. With this play up at the top, you can come down here and choose other web browsers for it to load in. I recommend using Google Chrome in terms of the developer experience, but it's good to know that you can test on other ones to make sure that your application looks good in all of the browsers. Unlike our C# applications, a Blazor application comes with a lot of scaffold already for us. So if I open program.cs, we're used to seeing a main function inside of a program class, and usually there's just one line, hello world, in there. But this is actually setting up our WebAssembly application and getting our components added to that application and kicking it off. At this point, I don't want to get too bogged down in reading through line by line and explaining what the lines do, but just know that your Blazor applications have more scaffold, more things provided for you than your console application. And where we're going to start our tour of Blazor is over in the sidebar. If you go into Pages, we can see the .razor files that represent those 3 pages that we saw. So we saw our home page that had a link to a survey and it said, welcome to the app. We saw a counter here that had our button and displayed the count. And then there was this fetch data page that displayed a table of forecast information. For what we're going to do today, what I want to do is go into the index.razor file, and let's just delete everything that's in here. So we're getting rid of that survey link, and we're just leaving at the top this directive, which defines how this, what URL this page loads under. So if we just go to the home page, like we don't type anything in that URL bar, we end up on this index.razor page. So if I hit play, let it run, now our home page here is blank. So if I were to come back here and add something to the page, like h1, and say my first Blazor app, since we we have to compile this application to get it to show up in Blazor. Even if I save my changes and refresh the page here, I'm not going to see those changes show up. So I actually want to stop my application from running and load it up again to see that new element show up on the page. So we give it a second, and now we see my first Blazor app showing up here. So this is the home page. So we're not at /counter up here, and we're not at /forecast or whatever the fetch is, not at /fetch data. We are just at the home page with no extra information in the URL bar. So that is what our page directive up here is setting up. For this video, we're just going to focus on the HTML syntax and building out some content onto this page, and then we will build upon this and in class and learn how to add that logic in so that you could have something like the counter page here that has a class that is hooked up to that markup on the page. So at this point, let's back up a step before we finish filling out this index.razor page. And you may have already gotten this from me in class, but it's worth repeating. So a web application typically is composed of 3 programming languages. We have HTML, which is hypertext markup language. We have CSS, which is cascading style sheets. And then we often have JavaScript, which is a programming language. So HTML is used to represent the content of your page. CSS is the style of that page, the appearance of that page. And JS is the logic of your page. So typically when you build a web application or a website, you often use all 3 of these languages. So you have a separate, you will often have a separate HTML file, a separate CSS file, separate JavaScript file, and you may have many of all of those types of files to build an application. And so an HTML element looks like what we're seeing here, where we have this markup around some text. So hypertext markup language, the hypertext refers to the fact that when you're building these documents, these hypertext markup language documents, that they can be linked to one another. Like every Wikipedia page links out to so many other Wikipedia pages. So that's the hypertext part. The markup part is that when we are representing content in our HTML, we have our content here, and then we often will have HTML elements around it, so that are marking up what that content should be. So I've got some content here, and then I have my markup on either side. Which is saying, hey, this content, when we show it, should be a header of level 1. That's what H1 stands for. Style here is going to be a different syntax. Don't worry too much about the syntax, but what CSS lets you express is not what the content should be, but how it should appear on the page. So for instance, if I wanted to change the H1 to be purple, I could say color purple, and that would change, if I loaded that style into this page, would change this text to show up in purple. And then JS typically is your logic, and that's its own programming language, and you could write a simple line of code like alert, hello. This pops up an alert box over the page with this text in it. What we're doing in this class and with Blazor is basically saying, hey, I don't want to write any JavaScript. Instead, I want to use my C# knowledge and write my logic using C#. So that's what Blazor allows us to do. Specifically, it uses this web standard called Webassembly, which allows Microsoft to package up the whole .NET framework and send it along and run it inside of the browser. So your C# can use all of the .NET features that you're used to, even though it's in the browser. This is a little misleading to sort of like cross out JavaScript. We actually still need JavaScript. JavaScript is what loads our C# application. So it's not that we've gotten rid of JavaScript entirely, but we can author all of our logic in C# using the things that we're comfortable with so far. So we can build classes and we can use fields and properties and methods in C#. Okay, so that's enough framing here for what's going on. What we're focused on to start is just that we can put some HTML into this page. So I want to show a couple of basic elements and also mention that there are reference pages that you should use whenever you're working in HTML. So a good one is W3 Schools. So if you go to W3 Schools, there is a Learn HTML page and a HTML reference. Learn HTML takes you through the basics over here in the sidebar of a whole different slew of topics in HTML, walks you through them. And then the HTML reference shows you all of the HTML elements and then gives you documentation on them. So if I wanted to look up that H1 that I was just using, I can see, there's H1 through H6, and those are HTML headers. And if I go in here, I can see here is an example of the different headers, H1 through H6. And there's a try it yourself button, which has a little interactive example. So on the left-hand side, we've got those elements. On the right-hand side is them rendered. And you can go ahead and change them and rerun it to see how these HTML elements work. So this stuff, this HTML, you could bring into your project. Like we could paste that snippet in of HTML elements, and for the most part, get this running. This will work fine for basic HTML elements, but as soon as you start having some of the snippets in W3 Schools, we'll have some like JavaScript mixed in there. So there's a little caveat there that some things you can't just copy and paste into your project, but this will give you a good framework for learning how HTML works. And what I recommend doing is when you want to use a new element in your project, like let's say I was going to go ahead and bring in a paragraph, so a P tag here. I would look at, okay, here's how it works. I would try it myself. I'd be like, okay, this is how it works in a regular HTML file outside of Blazor. And then once I feel like I've got how this works, I can start bringing it into Blazor and dealing with hooking it up to all of the Blazor specifics, like hooking it up to code. So let's do a couple of examples here. And let me put a comment in here. So I'm using the hotkey in Visual Studio to insert a comment, and in Blazor, comments in your markup are written this way with @ star @. So H1 is a header of level importance 1. There are H1 through H6 elements. So let's throw in a little introduction here. So my name is Mike, and I'm throwing this into a P tag or a P element. So it starts with this opening tag syntax and ends with this closing tag syntax. And this is for representing paragraphs on your page. So my name is Mike. I'm a professor. And drop in a little waving emoji here using the Windows keyboard. Save it, run it, and now we should see an H1 and a paragraph showing up on our page. There we go. And let's do a slightly more complicated element here. So let's do a unordered list, so a UL. And if I type in UL and then hit tab, Visual Studio is going to expand this into a unordered list with list items inside of it. So unlike our paragraph and H1, which are kind of standalone elements, UL and LI go together. So UL is an unordered list, and then nested inside of that, so in between the opening and closing tags here, we are going to create our list items. So maybe I'm going to create a header here to say H2, what I'm learning right now, and then I'll throw in HTML, and then LI tab, LI CSS, and LI C#, and give this a play. And now we have our H2, which is a header of level importance 2, so it's slightly less important than our H1s. And I've got an unordered list here with a couple of list items in it. So I am going to end this video here. We did a basic introduction to what Blazor is, the languages of web development, getting our Visual Studio set up for Blazor, and then we opened up this project and we're able to use HTML inside of our index.razor page here.